So this book is a love story that takes place in the present day. 35-year-old Rob Carey is in the middle of a relationship breakdown, and he wants to hold on to a woman named Carolyn. And due to his own thoughtlessness, the relationship has become fractured, and he knows it's ending, and he's trying to hold on to her. And in the middle of this psychologically and emotionally tumultuous time for him, he gets a call from his old boarding school, and unfortunately one of his old teammates on a rowing team has killed himself, and he has to go back to the service and face what happens in his personal life and what happened in his past as a rower at this elite boarding school. And so the narrative goes from 15 years before, when he was a teenager, to the present, and it skips back and forth, and there's two voices. The voice of Rob Carey, the 18-year-old PG rower, and the voice of Rob Carey, the 35-year-old. So the two sections I'd like to read are, one section is from the 18-year-old Rob Carey rowing at the boarding school, and then a short section of Rob Carey with this woman that he desperately loves. And that would give you an example of how the book has been constructed and set up. So we begin at the boarding school. My fragile rowing shell was moving fast and light down the river. It surged forward, then coasted while I recoiled for another stroke. I felt the pull of the sculls in my legs, then in my back. I heard only the splashing and the zing of the water dripping from the blades as I slipped by the ancient school. The endless lawns to starboard turned into soccer fields and then into the practice football field. The freshly painted goalposts marked the end of my practice session, and passing them, I tasted my speed, closed my eyes, and inhaled it, the vibrations of the boat in my spine. I leaned back, and the shell ran out beneath me, gliding over the water like a bird. A million trees up the mountain threw rippled reflections across the water. The blades of my sculls kissed the smooth surface as I neared the Fenton School boathouse. I could turn and see the dock floating 4 inches above the waterline. Even this late in the season, I could feel the heat rising up off the banks, as if the valley had kept part of the summer's warmth for the fall. I hunched over and drew a stopwatch from my sweatshirt and did the daily math, looking at the digital numbers through watery eyes. The calculations were easy. I knew how far 2,000 meters was down the course, and I allowed some time because you rowed with the current to get down the river and fought it coming back. I was shaving off seconds, all right. I had a notebook stowed under the foot stretchers, and I pulled it out after I slid off the boat's seat into the dock. I flattened the pages on my damp thighs to pencil in my new times, saw the improvement and shut the book fast, slid it into the waistband of my rowing trunks. I flipped the scull out of the water, lifted it on my shoulders, and settled it on my head, and waited while it dripped, balancing my body the fulcrum as the boat gently teeter-tottered against my scalp. Holding the boat steady with my left hand wrapped around a rigger, I bent my knees and picked up the sculls with my right, straightened and began a careful walk up to the boathouse. When I had negotiated the 57 steps to the dark entrance, I aimed the bow into the straps hanging from the rafters within, then strapped in the stern. I popped open the deck plate and used a crusty, grease-stained towel to wipe the river water from the hull. I pulled the ropes that raised the boat to where it settled into a sliver of reflection in the gloom and tied up, still a little out of breath. I set the sculls upright in their wooden rack and pulled the great sliding doors shut. As I steamed my way through the clear early morning cold of the fall towards the school, my knees would start to ache by the time I reached the first buildings. The muscles in my back would tighten, and my fingers would begin to burn. It didn't matter because, thinking about the times in that notebook, I believed I had an edge. So we then move forward from there to his voice as an adult. And so that is the voice of the teenager. The adult voice is the voice of somebody holding on to Carolyn Smythe, the love interest in the novel. And things have reached a crucial point. And he's remembering meeting her, just as he's in the situation of being thrown out of the apartment that they share together in Soho in New York. "I have a crooked room you should see," Carolyn had said. "It's a studio on Broome Street. There are days you remember in their entirety, hours you know transformed you. I now knew a beautiful woman with a crooked room in New York. And that early evening when the rain was threatening down the East River, when clouds rolled over the streets, I'd spent 2 lazy hours having dinner with her alone in a restaurant before the nighttime rush. Her mention of the crooked room was the beginning of a storm of love. We were walking up Mulberry Street like tourists, holding hands, a bottle of wine left empty for our shyly grinning waiter on the white tablecloth. I remember every step. Her unspoken question to me was not really a question, and we turned into Broome Street and walked past the galleries and the brick walls, under the hooked lamps, and by the drunken graffiti and the tired traffic, with me one half step behind her, wanting to savor this moment when the stars aligned and life was perfect. Walking along that old broad sidewalk, I knew I was sailing into something more than a relationship, something more than a love affair, half drunk, half in love, full of lust. I followed her without pause into the elevator. We stood there not touching each other, our eyes forward, Carolyn idly humming, pleased with herself, a formality between us, still as if there was a contact that had yet to be defined and signed and sealed. It took a full minute for the doors to shut and the elevator to begin its scraping ascent. I felt her close to me, inches away, a dramatic face with deep eyes, a severe face possibly, a woman who might be a shade too tall, too strong, her center of gravity too low, as if she was set to push you away, and she was strong. God, I did learn that. Strong enough to bear whatever came her way, strong enough to tear that place to pieces. I had to turn my head and pretend to examine the 3 numbers on the faded elevator panel because it was hard to breathe when I looked at her. She knew I was struggling, and she was loving it. When the doors opened to the loft, I was confronted with her life as it was lived then. The cavern of space, the pushed open windows, the lone couch from her parents' summer house in the center of the room, the work table and her equipment, the makeshift kitchen we would tear out a year later with a double bed beside it, unmade, her shoes jettisoned at the end. The air that rushed in over us was cold, and the rain that had burst down on the street below and brushed against the windows, the traffic hissing against the summer cloudburst. Undressing her, sitting in that bed of hers, I chased her body as she leaned over to pick up the blankets and the sheets off the floor. I gazed at her face as I explored her, Carolyn's face, all seriousness, as if she had found me herself and was discovering me methodically and carefully. I knew that somehow the two of us had carelessly joined hands and jumped into whatever was next in our lives, into that atmosphere of the future, that nothingness of the future. What was being done now was going to be impossible to undo without the greatest loss. This virtual stranger, with the heat rising from her naked body, her shoulders round and graceful, neck bones perfect, her face close to mine, on those cool sheets, more, her long arms and legs, the muscles of her forearms that stood out and shifted and twirled as she held my hand. The surprise of her fingers and palms, which were rough, and her nails clipped down for work. When I felt the mysterious subterranean muscles of her belly shifting under me, I was seized by a rush of love and longing, so powerful I gasped, and she pulled her face from mine quizzically, and I shook my head. And what I wanted to whisper to her, if I had the words of such thoughts come to a man so utterly overwhelmed, was that she could have this section of my life right now, and the rest too, if she wanted it. It was a crazy, silent deal you make with yourself when you suddenly touched a woman who was made for you, and feel that searing terror of loneliness after years of living by yourself. It happened to me in a crooked room against a body I yearn for like nothing else, need more than water or blood or breathing. Just enjoy it, she whispered. I don't want to hear you. It was the urgent whisper. What do lovers do when they are confronted by that ocean of life, that electric field that develops between two people, maybe once in a lifetime and mostly never? Where does all that power go? I learned that day. It is not graceful, it's not even romantic. It's two people clinging on for dear life. Afterward, with her lying next to me, her breathing gently into the sleep, the evening now fully upon us, the white light I would come to know so well making squares on the marred floor, I knew only that the worst fate in this world would be to lose her. I'd love her no matter what, so long as I had this, I'd take whatever came. I have a crooked room, she had said. Come and enter. And so came her pregnancy, and so came the blood, and so came the doctors, and so came the news in the doctor's office that Carolyn did indeed require surgery, that the infection was catastrophic and severe and had forever damaged her. She'd love her life, she'd have her life, but there would be no more. It was the best they could do, we were told, in that quiet office, in that awful place where I took her hand before. She began to weep when we were politely left alone, where she scraped her nails against my hands, and then against my arms, and then across my chest, and then over my face, as if scribbling me out, where she wept, and then pushed me away.